A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Herman, I was looking at the setup Daniel uses to send us these prompts every week, and it struck me just how strange it is. Here we are, deep into the era of agentic artificial intelligence, discussing the most sophisticated systems on the planet, and yet the primary way we interact with these agents is through apps like Telegram or Slack. It is almost like we've built a Ferrari engine, but we're steering it with a pair of old bicycle handlebars.
Herman Poppleberry here, and Corn, you have hit on one of the most fascinating bottlenecks in the industry right now. It is what I call the UI gap. We have these incredibly capable agents that can browse the web, write code, and manage entire workflows. But because building a custom front end is such a massive chore, everyone just defaults to the easiest path. And right now, that path leads straight to a chat box designed in the mid-2010s. Our friend Daniel is a perfect example. He uses Telegram as his control surface because it is always there, it is cross-platform, and the API is incredibly easy to hook into. But as we are going to explore today, that convenience comes with some really heavy technical debt.
It is the Telegram as a back-end paradox. It feels like a hack because it is a hack. But it is a hack that has become the industry standard for independent builders and people using platforms like N8N. Today we are diving into why we are stuck in this messaging app loop, the actual technical limitations of using Slack or Discord as an operating system for agents, and whether we are finally seeing the birth of a true agent-native interface. This is episode 1056 of My Weird Prompts.
It is funny you mention N8N because that is where a lot of this started. If you are a builder and you create a complex workflow that automates your entire calendar or your research process, you need a way to trigger it. You could build a custom React app, host it on Vercel, manage authentication, and figure out a mobile layout. Or you can just grab a Telegram bot token in 30 seconds and have a working interface on your phone immediately. The friction difference is astronomical. When you are in that prototyping phase, you don't want to spend 3 days fighting with CSS grid layouts. You want to see if the agent can actually book the haircut.
Right. But that ease of use hides a lot of structural problems. We are basically forcing high-dimensional intelligence through a one-dimensional straw. When you are using a messaging app as your UI, you are restricted by whatever that platform allows you to do. You are playing in their walled garden. So, Herman, let's frame this for everyone. Why are we building the future of intelligence on top of platforms that were originally designed for human-to-human gossip?
It comes down to the distribution and the notification layer. A messaging app solved the two hardest problems of software for you for free. First, it is already on your device and you already look at it 50 times a day. Second, it has a built-in push notification system that actually works. If an agent needs to ask you a human-in-the-loop question like, "Hey, should I buy this flight or not?" a Telegram message is 1,000 times more likely to get an immediate answer than an email or a custom dashboard that you have to remember to check. But, as you said, we are pushing intelligence through a straw. These platforms were never meant to handle complex state or multimodal feedback or the kind of asynchronous callbacks that a true agent needs.
I want to get into the technical weeds here, because I think people underestimate how much the API design of these apps shapes the behavior of the AI. For instance, let's talk about Telegram versus Slack. I have noticed that most agent builders prefer Telegram. Is that just because it is more open, or is there something specific in the API that makes it a better control surface?
Telegram is currently the gold standard for Hacky Agent UIs for a few very specific reasons. The first is the inline keyboard. If you have ever seen those little buttons that appear right under a message, that is a huge deal for agents. It allows the agent to present discrete choices to the user without the user having to type anything. It turns a conversation into a structured interaction. But the real game changer, and something we have seen explode in the last year, is the Telegram Mini Apps platform. It basically allows you to launch a full-screen web view inside the chat. So you get the distribution of a chat app, but the flexibility of a real front end. As of early 2026, these mini apps have become the go-to move for anyone trying to bridge the gap between a simple bot and a real application.
Compare that to Slack. I have used some AI integrations in Slack, and they always feel a bit more clunky.
Slack uses something called the Block Kit. It is very structured and very corporate. It is great for building forms or simple approvals, but it is incredibly rigid. If you want to do anything dynamic or high frequency, Slack starts to feel like a straitjacket. Plus, Slack has some pretty aggressive rate limits. If you have an agent that is thinking out loud and sending 10 updates a second as it processes information, Slack will shut that down real fast. Telegram is generally much more permissive with that kind of high frequency messaging. And let's not even get started on Discord. Discord is great for communities, but their bot API is built around the idea of a listener, not necessarily a personal assistant. You have to deal with complex permission scopes and the constant threat of being flagged as a spam bot if your agent gets too chatty.
This brings up the issue of state management. In a normal app, the front end and back end share a common understanding of what is happening right now. But in a chat app, the only state is the message history. If the agent needs to remember that 3 messages ago you were talking about a specific file, it has to pass that history every single time. How does that affect the latency and the cost of running these things?
That is a massive pain point. We talked about this a bit in episode 938 when we discussed the agent operating system. When you use a chat app as your UI, you are essentially stateless. Every time the user sends a message, your backend gets a webhook. It has no idea what happened before unless you have built a separate database to track the conversation ID and the context. Developers end up having to build this whole middleware layer just to bridge the gap between a stateless chat API and a stateful AI agent. You are essentially building a second brain just to help the agent remember what it said in the chat box. It is incredibly inefficient.
And then you hit the context window problem. Because messaging platforms often truncate history or make it difficult to pull old messages efficiently, right?
If you want to give your agent the full context of a long project discussed over 3 weeks in a Telegram group, you can't just expect the API to hand that to you easily in a way that is ready for a large language model. You end up building a custom vector store just to manage the chat history of the very UI you are using. It is redundant work. You are paying for the storage, you are paying for the embedding tokens, and you are paying for the compute to search that history, all because the UI layer doesn't have a native memory.
I also want to touch on the latency issue with the polling versus webhook models. Most of these bots rely on webhooks, where the messaging platform sends a data packet to your server whenever something happens. But that adds layers of network hops. If I am trying to have a low latency voice conversation with an agent, surely Telegram or Discord is the worst place to do it.
Oh, it is terrible for voice. If you are trying to do real-time audio, like we see with the latest models that have sub 500 millisecond response times, the overhead of a messaging app API kills the experience. You are adding maybe 200 or 300 milliseconds of just API overhead before the model even starts thinking. This is why we are seeing a shift away from these platforms for anything that involves voice or high-speed interaction. Discord is a bit better because they have native voice channels and a more robust WebSocket connection for their gateway, but even then, you are still fighting their protocol rather than building your own optimized one. You are trying to stream audio through a system designed for text packets. It is like trying to run a marathon in a deep-sea diving suit.
It feels like we are in this awkward middle ground where the tools for building agents have outpaced the tools for interacting with them. We have these powerful frameworks like LangChain or N8N, but they are all just pointing toward a webhook URL for a chat app. What happens when these platforms change the rules? I am thinking about platform risk. We have seen this before in the early days of Twitter or Facebook, where developers built entire businesses on their APIs only to have the rug pulled out.
That is the second-order effect that worries me the most. If you build your entire agentic workflow around Slack's Block Kit and Slack decides to change their pricing model or their API structure, your UI is dead. Or even worse, if your agent starts performing tasks that the platform deems a violation of their terms of service, they can ban your bot and you lose your entire interface to your users. We actually touched on this a bit in episode 835 when we talked about red teaming your user experience. If your agent is the one interacting with the UI, you have to worry about the UI itself being a point of failure. You are building on rented land, and the landlord can change the locks at any time.
So, if the current state is these hacky workarounds on Telegram and Slack, what does the alternative look like? Are we seeing the rise of dedicated messaging apps that are built specifically for agents? I mean, the prompt asked if there is something out there that supports both voice and text and can plug into various backends.
There are a few emerging players, but it is still early days. We are starting to see the rise of what I call agent native UIs. Think of something like the Versal AISDK 4.0, which came out late last year. It is not an app you download, but it is a set of tools that makes it so easy to build a custom, high-performance agent front end that the excuse of using Telegram is starting to vanish. It supports things like generative UI, where the agent can actually decide to render a chart or a map or a set of buttons dynamically rather than just sending text. This is a huge shift because the agent isn't just talking to you, it is building the interface you need in real time.
That is a huge distinction. In Telegram, the agent sends text that might look like a button. In a generative UI, the agent actually sends the code to render a functional component. It is the difference between a waiter describing a menu and a chef actually putting the plate in front of you.
And that leads us to the idea of the agent dashboard. If you look at how professional teams are starting to manage agents, they are moving toward local-first, electron-based applications. These are apps that live on your desktop, have direct access to your file system, and use WebSocket connections for near zero latency. They don't look like chat boxes, they look like command centers. You have a log of what the agent is doing, a window for its current browser session, a set of toggle switches for its permissions, and yes, a chat box for giving it instructions. But the chat is just one part of the whole.
It sounds like the transition from the command line to the graphical user interface in the 80s. We started with just text because that was what we knew. But eventually we realized that windows and icons and folders were a better way to represent what the computer was actually doing.
That is a perfect analogy. We are in the command line phase of AI agents. Text is the lowest common denominator, so we use it for everything. But agents are not just text generators anymore, they are action engines. They need a way to show you their state. If an agent is halfway through a complex 3-hour task, a chat app is a terrible way to monitor it. You don't want to scroll through 500 messages to see where it got stuck. You want a progress bar. You want a status indicator that turns red if there is an error. You want an interrupt button that actually works instantly. Imagine trying to use Photoshop, but you have to type move layer 3 pixels left instead of just dragging it. That is what using Slack for agents feels like right now.
Let's talk about that human in the loop requirement. One of the biggest friction points in agentic workflows is when the agent needs a human to approve something. In a messaging app, that usually looks like a message saying, "Hey, can I do this?" And you type yes. But in a more sophisticated UI, you could have a side-by-side comparison of what the agent wants to do versus what it was told to do, with a single click to approve or edit.
And that is where the dedicated platforms are starting to win. There are new tools like LangGraph and specialized front ends built on top of it that allow for this kind of granular control. But the problem is distribution. How do I get that sophisticated dashboard onto my phone so I can check it while I am walking the dog? That is why people keep going back to Telegram. It is the only platform that has solved the mobile distribution problem for independent developers. It is a bit of a tragedy, really. We have the technology to build better UIs, but we don't have a better way to get them into people's pockets without going through the App Store gatekeepers.
It is the ultimate convenience trap. You know it is bad for you in the long run, but it is so easy right now. But Herman, I have to ask, what about the privacy and security side of this? If I am running my agent through Discord, Discord sees every single instruction I give it and every single piece of data the agent sends back. For a lot of people, especially in the corporate world, that should be a deal breaker.
It absolutely should be. We covered this in episode 1070, discussing the agentic secret gap. When you use a third-party messaging app as your UI, you are effectively giving that platform a front-row seat to your most sensitive workflows. If your agent has access to your company's financial data and it is reporting its findings to you via a Slack channel, that data is now living on Slack servers. For a lot of high-security environments, that is a non-starter. This is why we are seeing a massive push for local first agent interfaces that use encrypted protocols to talk to the backend, bypassing the big messaging platforms entirely. If you are building for enterprise, you cannot use Telegram. Period. You have to build a custom, secure shell.
So let's look at the specific tools that are trying to bridge this gap. You mentioned Versal, but are there any standalone apps? Like, if I want an app on my phone that is just for talking to my agents, and it has a great API that I can plug my N8N workflows into, does that exist yet?
There are a few projects trying to be the browser for agents. One that has been gaining traction is called LibreChat. It is open source, you can self-host it, and it acts as a centralized hub for all your different AI models and agents. It has a much more robust UI than a simple chat app, and it supports things like file uploads and custom presets. But even LibreChat is still fundamentally a chat interface. The real holy grail is a platform that treats the agent as a first-class citizen, not just a participant in a conversation. We are seeing some movement with things like the Multion browser or specialized agents like Devin for software engineering. They don't use Telegram. They build their own custom environments because the work is too complex for a chat box.
What would that look like in practice? If you were designing the perfect agent interface from scratch, what are the 3 things it must have that Telegram and Slack don't offer?
First, it needs a native state visualization. I should be able to see the agent's thought process, its current task list, and its memory in real time without it cluttering the chat. Think of it like a sidebar that updates as the agent works. Second, it needs multimodal input and output as a core feature, not an afterthought. That means low latency voice, image generation, and the ability to interact with UI elements like sliders or maps directly. Third, it needs a standardized permission system. Instead of just giving an agent full access to my Slack workspace, I should be able to grant it temporary, granular permissions for specific tasks through the UI itself. Like, you have permission to read this one folder for the next 10 minutes.
That third point is huge. The current model is very all or nothing. You either give the bot token full access to a channel or you don't. There is no nuance, and that nuance is what we need for agents to become truly useful in our daily lives. We need to be able to trust them.
And trust comes from transparency and control, 2 things that are very hard to achieve inside someone else's messaging app. When you are on Slack, you are subject to Slack's transparency rules. When you have your own UI, you can see exactly what the agent is doing at every step. This is the difference between a black box and a glass box.
I want to go back to the idea of the agentic operating system. In episode 938, we talked about the back end of that, the orchestration layer, but the UI is really the shell of that operating system. If we look at the history of computing, the shell is what defines the user's relationship with the machine. If our shell for AI is a chatbot, we will always treat AI as something we talk to. If our shell is a set of tools and dashboards, we will treat it as something that works for us.
That is a profound shift, and I think we are seeing the beginning of that transition right now. In late 2025 and early 2026, we have seen an explosion of specialized agent environments. These don't use Telegram. They build their own custom environments because the work is too complex for a chat box. The hacky workarounds are mostly for the general purpose, personal assistant type agents. But even those are going to outgrow the chat box soon. We are moving from the era of the chatbot to the era of the agentic workspace.
So if I am a builder right now, and I am currently using Telegram because it is easy, what is the signal that it is time to move off? When have I outgrown the hack?
The signal is when the limitations of the interface start affecting the performance of the agent. If you find yourself having to write complex code to parse user intent because you can't just give them a drop-down menu, you have outgrown it. If your agent is failing because it loses context that the messaging API didn't preserve, you have outgrown it. If you are spending more time managing Slack rate limits than you are improving your agent's logic, you have outgrown it. And most importantly, if you are worried about the security of the data flowing through that third-party platform, you should have moved off yesterday.
That is a great rubric. I think a lot of people are at that tipping point, and they just don't realize that the tools to build something better are already here. It is no longer a 6-month project to build a custom front end. With modern SDKs like the Versal AI SDK 4.0, you can do it in a weekend. You can have a streaming, multimodal interface that looks professional and works exactly how you want it to.
It is the difference between being a hobbyist and being a professional in this space. The hobbyist will stay on Telegram because it is fun and easy. The professionals will build their own control surfaces because they need the reliability, the security, and the rich interaction models that a real UI provides. It is about taking ownership of the entire stack, from the model to the mouse click.
We have covered a lot of ground on the technical side, but I want to bring it back to the practical takeaways for our listeners. If you were building agents, or even just using them, how should you be thinking about this UI gap?
The first takeaway is to decouple your agent's logic from the delivery mechanism. Do not bake Telegram-specific code into your core agentic workflow. Use a middleware layer, something like LangServe or a custom fast API gateway, so that you can swap out the UI whenever you need to. If you build everything around Slack-specific formatting, you are locking yourself into a dying paradigm. Keep the brain separate from the mouth.
That is smart. It makes your system future-proof. What is the second one?
The second takeaway is to start experimenting with agent-native UES. If you haven't looked at things like the Versal AI SDK, or even just building a simple Streamlit dashboard for your N8N workflows, you are missing out on a lot of power. You will be amazed at how much more capable your agent feels when it has a proper place to display its work. Even a simple dashboard that shows the agent's current task list can make the experience feel 10 times more professional.
And the third takeaway for me is the human-in-the-loop aspect. We need to stop thinking of human intervention as a failure of the agent and start thinking of it as a collaboration. A good UI makes that collaboration seamless. A bad UI, like a chat app, makes it a chore. If you find yourself annoyed by your agent's questions, it might not be the agent's fault. It might be that your interface is making the interaction more difficult than it needs to be.
I love that. It is all about reducing the friction of intelligence. Whether that intelligence is artificial or human, the interface is what connects them. If the connection is poor, the results will be poor. This really reminds me of our discussion back in episode 558 about the briefing gateway. We talked about how to stop being pecked by ducks by creating a middleware that filters communication. A dedicated agent, UI, is effectively a more sophisticated version of that gateway. It is a way to manage the flow of information so that it is useful, not overwhelming.
So, as we look toward the future, do you think we will ever see a universal agent control protocol? Something like HTTP, but for interacting with agents where any UI can talk to any agent backend.
There are people working on it. We are seeing proposals for things like the Agent Protocol, which tries to standardize how we define tasks, steps, and artifacts. If that gains widespread adoption, then the UI gap will naturally close because builders will be able to create one front end that works with every agent framework. That is the dream. A world where you have your favorite agent browser and you just plug in the URLs for your various agents and it just works. You get your preferred interface, your preferred security settings, and your preferred notification system, regardless of who built the agent.
A browser for the agentic web? I like the sound of that. It feels like we're right on the cusp of it. It is the natural evolution of the internet. We went from static pages to interactive apps, and now we are moving to autonomous agents. Each step requires a new kind of window into the world.
We are. The infrastructure is being laid down as we speak. The transition from these hacky messaging app workarounds to proper native interfaces is going to be one of the biggest stories in AI over the next year or two. It is going to be the moment where AI stops being a novelty we chat with and starts being a tool we truly live with.
Well, I think that is a perfect place to wrap up this deep dive. It is clear that while Telegram and Slack have served us well as a starting point, they are not the end state for how we will interact with artificial intelligence. They were the training wheels, and it is time to take them off.
Not even close. We are just getting started. And hey, if you have been enjoying these deep dives into the plumbing of the AI revolution, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It genuinely helps other people find the show and keeps us motivated to keep digging into these weird prompts.
It really does. Thank you to Daniel for sending this one in. It is a topic that has been on my mind every time I open Telegram to check on our episode notes. You can find all of our past episodes, all 1056 of them, at myweirdprompts.com. We have a search feature there that works quite well if you want to find those specific episodes we mentioned today, like episode 938 or episode 835.
And we're on Spotify as well. Thanks for listening to My Weird Prompts. I am Herman Puppleberry.
And I am Corn. We will see you in the next one.
Until then, keep your agents close and your you is closer. Goodbye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my